When we talk about the history of tech, we are constantly fed the exact same Silicon Valley garage startups. The Steve soldering motherboards to build Apple, Bill Gates dropping out of Harvard to build Microsoft. But the absolute most disruptive piece of software in human history didn't start in a sunny California garage. It started in a freezing pitch-black bedroom in Helsinki, Finland. Linus Torvalds was not bred to be a tech billionaire. His family was essentially a dynasty of journalists. His parents were literal campus radicals in the 1960s, and his dad was a communist radio journalist. He was even named after Linus Pauling, the Nobel-winning chemist, though he later joked that he was named equally after the kid dragging the security blanket in the Peanuts cartoons. Growing up in the Torvalds household meant being surrounded by endless loud debates about politics, society, and the distribution of wealth. But while his parents were busy trying to ideologically dismantle the capitalist machine, young Linus was just trying to find some peace and quiet. He didn't care about Marxist theory or socio-economic revolutions. The only person who really spoke his language was his maternal grandfather, Leo Törnqvist. Leo wasn't a radical journalist, he was a hardcore statistics professor at the University of Helsinki. While other kids were out scraping their knees playing soccer, Linus was hanging out in his grandfather's study, completely mesmerized by mechanical calculators and towering stacks of mathematical papers. Leo recognized that his grandson's brain was wired differently, treating him more like a tiny, weird academic colleague than an actual child. He openly described his younger self as an ugly child with a big nose and terrible glasses. He wasn't necessarily bullied into oblivion, but he was entirely invisible to the social hierarchy. He was the kid sitting in the back row, hated sports and possessed a social battery that was permanently stuck at zero. But here is the wild irony. While he actively rejected his parents' loud radical politics, their total disregard for corporate greed secretly hardwired his brain. It perfectly set the stage for a guy who would eventually build the most valuable digital infrastructure on the planet and casually give it away to the entire world for absolutely nothing. While his dad tried desperately to push him into sports and normal social activities, Linus had absolutely zero interest. He was the classic undeniable basement nerd. He wanted to stay indoors, eat pretzels, and do math. When Leo brought the Commodore VIC-20 into the apartment in 1981, he wasn't trying to change the world. He just wanted a glorified digital calculator to help him process his statistics research. But to 11-year-old Linus, this beige plastic box was a portal to another universe. At first, his grandfather just used him as a human typist. Leo would write out his mathematical programs on physical pieces of paper, and Linus would sit on his lap manually punching the basic code into the keyboard. His very first solo program was the classic, undeniable rite of passage for every 80s nerd, a simple loop that just printed the word hello down the screen infinitely. He even wrote a tiny program to impress his younger sister that flashed "Sarah is the best" across the monitor. But here is where the story pivots from a cute childhood hobby into the origin story of a mastermind. In the early 80s, commercial software and video games were incredibly scarce, especially in Finland. If you wanted to play a game, you basically had to build it yourself. And building it meant dealing with the excruciating hardware reality of the era. The VIC-20 didn't have a sleek internal solid-state drive or even a floppy disk. To save or load his code, Linus had to record it onto standard audio cassettes. He would sit there for agonizing minutes, listening to the screeching digital static of his data, transferring, praying that a slight fluctuation in the tape didn't corrupt hours of hard work. Linus quickly realized that the basic programming language was too slow and bloated. He wanted to make a game where the screen could actually scroll sideways, but the VIC-20's processor just couldn't handle it using standard commands. Most kids would have just given up and gone outside, but Linus did the exact opposite. He wasn't just playing with a computer anymore. He was learning how to become the absolute master of the machine, forcing the hardware to bend entirely to his will. By 1987, the 17-year-old Linus had completely outgrown the VIC-20. He had squeezed every single ounce of processing power out of it, hitting the absolute mathematical ceiling of what that tiny machine could do. He desperately needed an upgrade to feed his coding addiction, so he took every cent of his saved-up allowance and bought a Sinclair QL. On paper, the QL was supposed to be a massive leap forward into the big leagues of computing. It boasted a Motorola 6008 processor and a staggering 128 kilobytes of RAM, but with a massive flaw: it was an absolute commercial disaster. Getting your hands on new software or floppy disks for the QL in the freezing, isolated suburbs of Finland was basically impossible. But what did Linus do? He completely ripped the Sinclair QL apart from the inside out. He didn't complain about the lack of software or wait around for developers to fix it. He just decided to build the entire ecosystem himself. He even programmed a massive, fully functional Pac-Man clone called Coolman. He was treating this this expensive piece of hardware not as a consumer product but as an absolute sandbox. But the real explosion happened when he hit university. In the fall of 1990, Linus enrolled at the University of Helsinki, and it was there in a computer science class that he was exposed to something that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of his life: the Unix operating system. Unix was running on the university's massive Microvax mainframe. It was elegant, it was powerful, and it was completely open-ended. It was everything the consumer-grade operating systems of the time were not. Linus was absolutely obsessed. He wanted that exact same raw, unadulterated power on his desk at home. But true Unix licenses cost thousands of dollars, and they only ran on heavy enterprise-grade hardware. So, Linus took a massive financial risk. He pulled out a student loan and bought an absolute monster of a machine. But MS-DOS felt like a Fisher-Price toy. So he bought a textbook by a professor named Andrew Tannenbaum. The book came with a floppy disk containing MINIX, a stripped-down Unix-like teaching operating system. It was cool, but it was artificially limited. It was designed strictly for students to learn from, not to be a daily driver. MINIX didn't have a good terminal emulator, but in true Torvalds fashion, he didn't wait around for an update. He just started writing his own terminal emulator from the bare metal up, strictly in x86 assembly, and somehow he accidentally built his own completely new operating system kernel. On August 25, 1991, a 21-year-old Linus Torvalds sat down at his keyboard and posted a casual message on the comp.os.minix. But here is the wildest part of the story. He didn't even name it Linux. Linus originally wanted to call his project FreeX, a combination of the words free, freak, and the letter X as a nod to Unix. When it came time to actually upload the code to the internet, he sent the files to a volunteer administrator at his university, a guy named Ari Lemke, who was running the local FTP server. Ari took one look at the name FreeX and thought it was an absolutely terrible, unmarketable name. So without even asking Linus for permission, Ari just created a directory on the server called Linux and dropped the source code inside. Linus eventually just shrugged and rolled with it. What started as a tiny hobby folder on a random FTP server eventually evolved into the Android operating system powering the smartphone in your pocket right now. But here is the crucial detail most people completely misunderstand. Linus didn't build a full desktop operating system with a shiny taskbar and a start menu. He built the kernel, the raw beating heart of the machine. For years, Linux was completely terrifying for normal people. It was just a blank, unforgiving command line. But then came Ubuntu, backed by a South African billionaire. Ubuntu's entire mission was Linux for human beings. They took this hardcore, intimidating hacker software and slapped a gorgeous, user-friendly graphical interface on it, proving once and for all that you didn't need a PhD in computer science to escape Microsoft's ecosystem. Then you had Linux Mint, which essentially became the ultimate digital life raft. When Microsoft started completely losing the plot, shoving targeted ads into the start menu and forcing massive telemetry updates down our throats, millions of frustrated PC users jumped ship to Linux Mint. It offered a sleek, familiar, rock-solid desktop environment that looked and acted exactly like classic Windows, but with zero corporate bloatware. And if you wanted to get dangerous, you booted up Kali Linux. This isn't a distro for writing college essays or browsing YouTube. Kali is a weapons-grade penetration testing distribution loaded with hundreds of advanced cybersecurity tools. Let me put it this way. If you are sitting in a coffee shop and the guy at the table next to you boots into Kali Linux, grab your laptop and leave immediately because he is actively picking the digital locks of every router in the building. Through these distros, Linux conquered enterprise servers, privacy advocates, and hackers. But there was still one massive, impenetrable fortress it just couldn't breach: the PC gamer's desktop. But for 30 years, if you wanted to play high-end video games, you were held completely hostage by Microsoft. Windows and DirectX had an absolute ironclad monopoly. The idea of the year of the Linux desktop was a massive running joke because of a brutal chicken and egg problem. Developers wouldn't port their games to Linux because there were no players, and gamers wouldn't switch to Linux because there were no games. Enter Valve. Gabe Newell and his engineering team saw Microsoft slowly building a walled garden around the PC ecosystem, and they realized they needed a permanent escape hatch. That escape hatch was Linux. Valve didn't just ask developers nicely to make Linux ports. They funded an absolute piece of digital witchcraft called Proton. Proton is a high-powered compatibility layer that translates Windows DirectX code into Linux-friendly instructions in real time. It allowed massive, heavy-hitting Windows games to run flawlessly on a Linux system without the original developers having to change a single line of code. And the ultimate weaponization of this software? Enter the Steam Deck. When Valve dropped the Steam Deck, they didn't slap a bloated expensive Windows license on it. They preloaded it with SteamOS, a custom operating system built directly on top of Arch Linux. They took Linus Torvalds' open source kernel and wrapped it in a seamless console-like handheld experience. The Steam Deck became a Trojan horse. It pushed Linux gaming past massive historic milestones on the Steam hardware survey, actively stealing market share away from Windows. Today, millions of people are playing massive AAA titles like Elden Ring and Cyberpunk on an airplane, completely unaware that the operating system making it all possible started because a stubborn Finnish kid refused to pay for a UNIX license. Linus didn't have billions of dollars in venture capital, and he didn't have a massive corporate campus. He just had a freezing room in Finland, a healthy disrespect for proprietary rules, and an absolute obsession with making the machine do exactly what he wanted. He gave the world the ultimate digital skeleton key, and decades later, Valve used it to finally break Microsoft's absolute grip on PC gaming. If you made it to the end of this deep dive, you're an absolute legend. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss these primetime drops coming at you. Drop a like and let me know in the comments, what is your absolute favorite Linux distro? And does the Steam Deck finally make you want to completely ditch Windows? See you in the next one.